Hey guys, welcome back to the Unleashed podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Rieger, and today we're chatting with my friend Rhiannon Dubois. She is the Director of Global Outreach for A21, but just launched the Divorce Healing Academy called Heartbreaks and Retakes, and she's doing some amazing work with A21 and just all over the world. But today we chatted about her story, which is amazing, of how she went through a divorce after only 2.5 years into a marriage, and how God has redeemed that in her life and brought her all the way from Australia to America, and how just an awesome story of God's redemption, his favor on her life, and how now she's pouring into women who have gone through very similar things that she did, and how she's seeing restoration in their lives as well. I enjoyed just getting to know her more. We talked about the work that A21 does. We talked about what trafficking looks like. I didn't expect to go down that road at all, but it's just a big problem, even here in the United States. And then we talked about just how God has redeemed her situation, and just the message of hope that if you've gone through a divorce, grieve, but then allow God to work in that, and He can bring you to another level and restore that relationship, and just put you on a place you might not have ever been before. And so just trust God to do that, because He's done it in Rhiannon's life and so many others' lives. But if you're going to love this episode. So good. Go to her website is heartbreaksandretakes.com. Check out what she's doing. Here is my interview with Rhiannon. All right. Rhiannon, welcome to Unleashed. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. It's just so cool to hear what you've been doing. And we've known each other for a few years now.
Hmm.
And I love your journey and what you're doing with heartbreaks and retakes. We'll get to that, but take me back to Australia and
Yes.
your
So
story.
I'm an Australian living in Texas now. But yeah, Australian clinical psychologist licensed in Australia. Grew up in outback Australia, like really remote
Mm,
Australia, as in like to give you some context, the closest fast food restaurant, closest McDonald's was an hour and a half away, closest set of traffic lights
no
was an hour and
way.
a half away. So I was like
I did not
out
know that.
Australia, grew up on a farm. And then I did relocate with my family to the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, which is a beautiful part of Australia when I was
Mhm.
a teenager.
Uh-huh.
I did a year of Bible college
Uh-huh.
after grade 12 and then went and studied psychology. So did a Bachelor of Psychological Science and doctorate in clinical psychology at
Wow.
the University of Queensland. And straight after that, I landed it was really a dream job,
Uh-huh.
working at a not-for-profit private psychology practice with all
Mhm.
proceeds going to victims of war, human trafficking, and
Wow.
natural disaster.
Wow. Were you interested in human trafficking? How, I'm just curious, when did that start? When did you have an interest in that?
Well, I think through this work, because we did training in on rehabilitation
Uh-huh.
in Cambodia, so I did a couple of trips to Cambodia training
Mm,
government and non-government organizations on trauma rehabilitation
got it.
to use with victims of trafficking. So there
Wow.
was a little introduction to counter trafficking back then, way back in like 2012, 13, and
Mm.
now sort of the latter part of my story now is I'm working in the counter trafficking movement.
I love it. I'll keep going, but it made me think of a question to ask you. But go ahead, keep going with your
Okay,
story.
great. So after that, I got married at 26, and was working in private practice, and I became acting clinical director of this private practice. There was about
Wow.
seven other psychologists there. But 2.5 years into my marriage, my husband at the time came to me and said he was actually working out on a cross trainer in the garage in our home gym. And he
Yeah.
said to me, I want to sell the house. And I was a little like, oh, I really like this house. Like, where's this coming from? And then he said, um, I'm leaving you. It's not you,
Gosh.
it's me. And this came totally left field out of nowhere. So he's like
Wow.
working out, and we're just having this conversation on a
Very
Sunday
nonchalant.
morning, and he tells me he's going to sell the house and he's leaving. And so I was
Wow.
29 at the time
My gosh.
and was just absolutely gobsmacked. And so I remember like literally sliding down the wall of the garage, like, and it felt
Mm.
like my whole world is crashing in on me.
Yeah. I mean,
So
normally wouldn't you say, "Honey, let's go to the couch, sit down. I got something to talk about," rather than, "Hey, I'm working out here. I just had a thought." What,
exactly, you would think so. You
right?
would think so, Ryan, but no, that wasn't the case. He didn't even stop working out. He finished his workout.
Oh, by the way, I'm thinking about selling the house and leaving you. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow, I'm so
So it
sorry. I
was
know
one of
that. I
those,
know it's fun. It's great that you can laugh about it now,
yeah,
because God's restored
for
all that for
sure.
you.
It's
But
like
I
12 and a
can't
half
imagine
years
how
ago
hard that
now.
would have been.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it was like in an instant, I had two big securities taken out from under my feet. So my marriage and my house. And now the
mm,
house might seem minor, but being a female, I'm very into like just having that
sure.
sense of security of home.
Yeah.
And so 2 days later, I got home from work and there was a real estate agent sitting at the kitchen table with him, and they
Mm,
were signing the paperwork to put the house up for sale.
wow.
And within an hour, he already had his bags packed in the car.
Oh my gosh.
He left. And so I was just like sitting on the kitchen floor sobbing, thinking, I'm on one hand, I'm this clinical psychologist. I was doing marriage counseling for other couples. And on the other hand, my whole life had just fallen into pieces.
Yeah.
I just felt so broken.
Mm,
And so then began this journey of healing and recovering. But in the process, I still had to go back to work. I was still managing this clinic.
mhm.
So it was learning to heal and well, grieve and heal while
Yeah.
also functioning and trying to carry on as normal.
Wow, how'd you go to work after all of that? I mean, I remember just now that I heard your interview with Chris Kane, it was just so good, by the way. I'll put a link in the show notes for you guys to listen to
Awesome.
that interview too. But just how did you, maybe was it just the fact that work gave you an opportunity to kind of check out and like be focused? And so it was actually a helpful thing rather than, oh, I have to go to work?
Yeah, it was helpful. In hindsight, I do think I probably should have taken more time off. I took three
Hmm.
days off work. But honestly, and this is probably quite avoidant of me, I
Yeah.
didn't want to just stay home and
Yeah.
sort of be a victim of my pain and just
Mhm.
focus on everything that was going wrong, like
Yeah.
on rebuilding. So I took 3 days off work and then went back to work, and I saw the most clients I'd ever seen in a year. Actually, my whole 9 years of private practice, that was the year that I saw the most clients ever.
Wow.
But God just graced me for it. So I
Yeah.
would sort of step into that office, makeup on, professional face on, which I'm sure
Mhm.
if your listeners are like in business and professionals, you know that sometimes you've got stuff going on at home that's
Yes. Yes.
um, falling apart, but you need to just go in and have your game face on. So going to work, it
Um,
was a great distraction, but it gave me a sense of purpose as well. And I
yeah.
remember counseling mums whose kids had cancer and they were dealing with that grief and who'd lost
Mm,
babies. And so it did actually put things in perspective for me that
sure.
yes, I'm going through pain,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of other people who are going through much
Mm,
worse struggles than me.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow, I could dig in so much more. The one of the thing I want to just think about what's fun is your story of how God probably, the whole trafficking thing that you're now doing. One of the themes of my podcast I talk about is, or at least I've had a couple episodes where I talk about how God puts highlights in your life, or he'll emphasize certain things to prepare you for what He's called you to do. And so I'd love to dig into just what you think, looking back at that when you first got interested in trafficking, how that probably prepared you. But I want to hear more of your story, like how you got to you came to how did you get to America all the way
Yeah.
from Australia?
So that was 2012. And then I'd been working in the practice for 9 years and just felt this sense of like, I think it's time to do
Yeah.
something different. When I was going through my divorce, a lot of my friends who were married with young kids were saying, Reed, just like move overseas, go and live a great life in France or Italy, like you're
Yes.
free. I think they were a little jealous of my freedom. You're free, just go have an adventure.
Yeah.
But I just felt like, no, I need to write this out. I don't want to escape, like run off to another country and just
Right.
escape my pain. So I think it was about 4 or 5 more years, 5 more years that I stayed there. And I'd
Mhm.
felt God speak to me a couple of years post-divorce about living in America and
Mhm.
California. Now, I'd never been
Yeah.
to California, never had this big like dream to live in America, but it was just
Yeah.
in a moment of just quiet time. It was like
Mm,
very strong, and I didn't actually tell
yeah.
many people about it. But I had this knowing that I think one day I'm going to live in America.
Mm,
For 9 years after in private practice, I was like, okay, I can just sense that the timing's right now to
yeah.
move. And so I looked up studying in a place in California, and then I realized, hang on, I'm 34. If I get a student visa to the US, I can't earn money. I'm just talking practically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I need to be able to support myself. So
Yes.
I put that idea to the side and then decided I was going to move to Melbourne, capital
Mhm.
city of Victoria, and open up a
Mhm.
private practice in the wealthiest suburb in Melbourne,
Mhm.
work 3 days a week, and then maybe focus on volunteering with refugees and just have some time to myself.
Mhm.
But then I gave my boss 6 months notice.
Yeah.
And 3 months into that 6 months notice, he was actually at a conference.
Mhm.
And my now boss, Nick Kane, said
Mhm.
to him, hey, we're interested in someone for this position of Global Director of Aftercare for A21. Do you know anyone?
Mhm.
And he said, I would not have suggested you to A21 and Nick if you hadn't have given notice. So
Wow.
again, it was just
My
this
goodness.
stirring of from God that,
Yeah.
okay, it's time, and being
Yes.
obedient. So I put my 6 months notice in
Wow.
with no job to go to.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a huge step of faith, especially, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness.
And
Wow.
the kicker was Nick said the role would involve a move to California.
And you immediately knew.
I
Yeah.
knew. I
Yeah,
was
that's it.
intimidated and overwhelmed, but I was like, okay, as soon
Yeah.
as that opportunity came up, I knew that that was a God thing. And I'd been familiar
Yes.
with Nick and Christine Kane since I was
Sure.
15. Chris
Yes.
had come and preached in our youth ministry.
Okay.
I knew of A21 too, so it just felt like, okay, A21's an
Mm.
amazing organization. They're very reputable. This is a right fit.
Yeah. When you felt it was time, like, because this is also kind of mirrors my story a little bit when I had the e-commerce business where we were had the mentorship program and people were paying monthly and it was going well, and I just sensed it was time.
Mm,
But I also had some prophetic words spoken that gave me courage to sell it.
right.
Um, and I know the Lord deals with everybody differently, but tell me about like, was it just one word and you knew it was time, or was it lots of time in prayer? Was it were there certain verses that came up that gave you confidence? Did you hear
Mhm.
something from the pulpit that it was speaking straight to you? Like
Right.
how to, what, if
How
you,
did I know?
how
Yeah,
did you
there was a
know?
few
Yeah,
things. And I
yeah,
think because like 3 years earlier, I'd felt God speak to me about the move to California. I
yes.
had this sense that there would be a move at some point, but there wasn't one word. I had a few words
Mm-hmm.
um, over a couple of years about a
Yeah.
change and like
Yes. Okay.
different things coming because I'd been through a
Yeah.
couple of breakups in that time too. Like we're talking, it
Mm-hmm.
was about 4 years, and I just felt like my life was kind of defined by grief for
Mm,
those years. That sounds bad. There were
yeah.
good times in
Sure.
there too, but I'd been through so much heartache. I was like, when am I going to get my break?
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm,
But there wasn't this clear word from God. And sometimes if I'm talking to friends or even team who feel like it's time to move on or something, and they're just waiting for this clear word from God that God just opens the heavens
yeah.
and speaks. Sometimes I encourage them that like it can be in the knowing, the sensing in your spirit
Yes.
that
Yes.
something
Yes.
is right or that it's time to move on. I don't
Yes.
know if God always gives us like these clear prophetic words.
Right.
Sometimes he doesn't, it's amazing.
Yes.
Other times it's just like this nudging, or for me.
Yeah. That's a great way to describe it. Wow. Okay. So you moved to California
Yes.
and you're
So I
working with
sold everything I
A21 as the
own.
global director of aftercare.
Yes. So moved to California. It was January 2018, moved to California
Okay.
with 4 suitcases, didn't know anyone. And
Yeah.
so I started life afresh there.
Oh,
Now I was living in Newport Beach, which was
okay.
quite
That's a nice
nice.
place to be.
It wasn't too hard, but started work as global director of aftercare for A21. It involved, or it does involve a lot of travel. So within that year, there was flying to Greece and Bulgaria and South
Oh my
Africa and
gosh.
Ukraine and Thailand and Cambodia. So very, very busy.
Hmm.
Um, and it was just amazing to start working for this brilliant organization under
Yeah.
Nick and Christine's leadership, and to get the opportunity to work with a global team of very passionate, intelligent people.
Yeah. Wow. And so then how long were you there before you moved to Texas, and how did that process happen?
Yes. So I was actually engaged in California and went through an engagement breakup in
Oh my
February
gosh.
2020, right before COVID. And then COVID hit, and living in California, things were very strict. Ryan, we weren't even allowed to go to the beach. I remember running one day on the beach, and a lifeguard came up, and the beaches in Newport Beach are like, there's
Mhm.
so much sand there. I was
Yes,
the only
yes.
one who like, you need to get off the beach. So it was
Mm,
very strict,
that's
and
crazy.
yeah, and our office had already relocated, a global office, a few months earlier to Texas,
Hmm.
but I had thought, okay, I'm going to stay in California. I do really like it here, but kind of 4 months into COVID, I realized this isn't working for me. Really, we weren't allowed to leave our apartments and go out, and
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
probably in hindsight quite depressed, couldn't get back to
Yes.
Australia, by myself grieving, and so I rang Nick and said, hey, I think I'll move to Texas.
Wow.
Um, so moved to Texas September 2020, and it was sort of the start of a fresh season for
Yes.
me. Kind of much like it felt like with moving to from Australia to California. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, again, I don't know many people here, but it was a great fresh start. Was
Mm,
able to buy and renovate a house, um, sort of 12 months after that, which could never have done that in
right.
California. And that was a bit of a redemption story too,
Hmm.
because my house had been sold when my ex had left, and I'm such a home person and love interior design, and I'd always
Hmm.
prayed like, God, I just want a home back. I think I lived in like 12 or 13 different houses over the 12 years
Oh my gosh.
of sort of being separated. um,
Mhm.
and so this was a redemption that God sort of restored that.
Absolutely.
And then met my now husband
Yes.
a few years ago, got married in 2023, became a stepmom,
Mm,
and God has just redeemed so much.
so awesome. I love it. God is so good.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
now you're helping people with that process of getting over the
Yes.
grievance. Well, okay, first I've alluded to it twice, and
Mhm.
I'm just curious about how you look back at your journey and see how God has brought you to where you are now, and that,
Mhm.
and do you, especially when you first got introduced to human trafficking, I imagine that you don't think that was a coincidence, right? That was like
And I
God
can see
giving you
that
an
God
opportunity.
worked through
Yeah.
that. And actually, you did ask before how I knew. A friend had asked because he knew that I was sort of wrestling with, okay, I need change. And he said to
Mhm.
me, write down everything that is in your heart that you're passionate
Oh,
about.
that's so good.
Just
Yes.
put it all on a piece of paper. And I actually found this piece of paper in a journal
Yes.
recently, and I had put down women, restoring brokenness, restored, and like
Wow.
restore is actually the department of A21 that I oversee now. Um, and
And you
I
wrote this down before you even talked to
I
Nick
wrote this
about
at the start of
working for
2017.
A21. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
And then, yeah, so when the job opportunity came up, I was like, this is everything that I
Oh my
wrote down.
goodness.
So,
Wow.
seen that. But yes, I can see that God was preparing me in
Yeah.
those days, like years ago, giving me insight into kind of trafficking and trauma rehabilitation to help me
Mhm.
with my work with A21. So I'm still in the role of Global Director of Aftercare for A21, but I've just also launched Heartbreaks and Retakes,
Yes.
which
Let's talk about that.
is provides coaching and courses to women navigating heartbreak, a breakup, and grief and loss.
Mm, wow. When did you just started that recently, right?
I yes, just launched it, which is
Let's talk
really
about it. What's it
exciting.
look like? How do people get involved?
Yeah, so the
All that.
website is heartbreaksandretakes.com. I'm also on social media on Instagram, Heartbreaks and Retakes. So if women are going through a breakup, it may be a breakup from a boyfriend or
Mhm.
a divorce or experiencing infidelity or grief and
Mhm.
loss, they are welcome to get in contact with me. And I offer coaching, individual coaching and group coaching as well. And hopefully in the future, some courses as well.
That's awesome. Love it. You and I can talk after this about that too if you want. I could
Awesome.
geek out. As you know, we've met several times talking about what you've been wanting to do, and it's fun because I love coming alongside people like you that have a heart for to have a message that the world needs to hear to get that out there. Um, and I could ask you so many questions. Like what one of the first things that, and then it's kind of pivoting a little bit, and we'll get back to heartbreaks and retakes because I want to make sure people find you. But with human trafficking, one of the things that we talked about when I first met you was what that looks like. And because you think about here, my picture of it is that it's somebody like, hey, come with me, and you're not going to see your family again. And I know that happens like in other parts of the world. But what is that for, just even for awareness here in the United States? What does it typically look like here?
Yeah, so sometimes it is that,
Hmm.
but other times people can be trafficked and they're still living their normal life. So
Mm,
teenagers, and this can be quite scary for parents to hear this, may still be going to school and
yeah.
operating and living quite a normal life,
Hmm.
maybe hanging around with the wrong crowd, but they may be unaware
Yeah.
that their child is being exploited. So there's also a scenario, a recruitment method called the lover boy scenario, and we see this a lot in the US, where typically it's women uh, trafficked, or they start this relationship with a guy who comes alongside them, and it's called love bombing. He showers them with gifts and
Hmm.
encouragement, and often they will prey upon girls who uh, are vulnerable, who maybe have low self-esteem, come from broken homes, and
Hmm.
so suddenly she feels really loved and cherished,
Yeah.
and he promises her all of this stuff, things that she wants, a home and maybe a family and financial stability.
Hmm.
And so he may groom her for up to 6 months or more, finding
Mm.
out information about where she lives, about her family, and collects all this
Yeah.
information that he later uses against her as threats if she doesn't
Oh my
come.
gosh.
And then often it involves taking her away from her family. So we're talking often it's women in their like late teens, 20s,
Okay.
moving away, relocating,
Yeah.
and then that's when the abuse exploitation can occur. So then forcing her to start to uh, have sex with men, and he
Mm.
takes the money,
Oh
and
my gosh.
using threats and punishments and threatening to harm not only her and often harming her, but
Hmm.
also her family if she
Mm.
doesn't comply.
My
So,
gosh.
I mean, you can imagine these victims, the
Yeah.
trafficker, her boyfriend, who she's kind of confused that she loves this guy, but he's now turned against
Yeah.
her and he's exploiting her. He's saying, if you don't do this, I'll kill your sister or
Mm.
your mum. And he knows where they live. Of course, she's going
Mm.
to comply.
Yeah, of course. And is that what that typically looks like? Because I've heard statistics that there's a lot of trafficking even happening in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Is
Whereas
that probably like if you had to like rank like these are the different methods of trafficking, is the lover boy strategy probably the one that occurs most
the
in
lover
this
boy,
part?
that is a big one. Another one is false job opportunity as a recruitment
Mm.
method. We see that quite a bit too. So, saying, okay, if you come here, we'll give you this job.
Wow.
And we're seeing that a lot from people coming across the border, like
Okay.
um, sort of escaping exploitation
Yeah.
in their country of origin,
Uh-huh.
here with the promise of a job, and then once they get here, the work is not what was promised, and we
Yeah.
see a lot of labor exploitation that
Okay.
way with men as well as women.
Okay. I have a friend, you probably heard of Terry Savelle Foy.
Yes.
She's local. She has a friend who has a ministry. They go into strip clubs, and Terry has
Mhm.
been there with them, and she was saying that how when they go into they're allowed to go in the dressing room. Women are just in tears and like glad that they're there. And she said many times they're there not because they want to be. And
Mhm.
so that would also be a traffic situation too, right?
Yes. So that's what a lot of people don't realize, that these women working in strip clubs or even working the streets,
Mm-hmm.
not always there by choice. Now, sometimes they are,
Mm-hmm.
and we won't get into those debates, but
Sure,
sometimes they
sure.
are, but sometimes they're not as well. So
Yeah.
they're being forced or coerced to work. They're not getting any of the money.
Wow.
Um, it's all going to their pimp. So it's like pimp controlled
Yeah,
traffic.
yeah. My gosh, how do you get somebody out of that situation?
Well, look, they need to want to
Yeah.
leave. And this is where it can get complicated. There's trauma bonds can occur, especially if we've got this lover boy type scenario, or
Hmm.
if the trafficker is actually still paying for some food and maybe a roof over their head. It may not be a
Hmm.
nice one, but there is sort of some sense of like safety in
Sure.
that if they don't have an alternative.
Yeah.
Um, it can be quite challenging, especially with these trauma bonds where there is this sort of semi quasi relationship with the trafficker.
Hmm.
And with trauma bonds, it works on this pattern of intermittent reinforcement. So sometimes the trafficker, the boyfriend, will be nice to them and shower them with the gifts and the flattery.
Yes.
And most of the time, she's not getting that. She's getting the
Yeah.
punishment. But then occasionally, she gets that reward. And so it becomes
Mm.
very confusing.
Yes.
So, look, we need know even with parenting children, that process of intermittent reinforcement, if you're trying
Hmm.
to encourage a new behavior, if you start to do that at the end, kids
Hmm.
behave, well, the kids will do what you want because
Wow.
I might get the reward this time.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Yes.
so it's the same principle with trauma bonds. And so that's why it can
Mm.
be so hard to leave. And a lot of people will
Mm.
say, well, why don't they just leave when we're talking about trafficking survivors?
Right.
Because it's not that typical, women chained to the bed and
Sure.
locked up somewhere. Sometimes that does happen. And certainly we provide aftercare services in
Mm.
6 countries, and sometimes that does happen. But a lot of trafficking in the US, we don't see that scenario. There
Yeah.
is a bit
Yeah.
of a freedom of movement,
Yeah.
but there it's the threats and the
Mm.
punishment.
Yeah.
So there's different ways that people can leave trafficking. Sometimes it's through law enforcement operations, and our team will be there to provide care packs and uh, let them know of the services that we can provide. So we offer accommodation services, medical and psychological care,
Yeah.
legal assistance, employment opportunities,
Mm.
education, relocation, repatriation if needed. So we really provide
Wow.
holistic support. But it is up to the victim whether
Hmm.
they want to leave. And sometimes there's a statistic that says it can take up to 7 times for a victim of trafficking, 7 sort of outcries or
Wow.
encounters with a
Yes.
service provider for them to actually decide, I want to leave. And it's a courageous thing for them to leave,
Yes.
especially if there's these threats of punishment and there's so much
Hmm.
fear of what if the trafficker comes after me or my family.
Yeah. Wow. What does aftercare look like in the other countries that you guys are working in, and what are you
Yes,
guys
so we've
doing for
got
those folks?
Yeah, we're in Thailand, Cambodia, South Africa,
Yeah.
Greece, and Bulgaria. And in the US, we're in Texas and North
Uh-huh.
Carolina. So, look, in Cambodia, we work a lot with minors. So,
Uh-huh.
children who are victims of, we're seeing a lot of online sexual exploitation,
Mm. Do their
which is
parents know about that? Or is it?
often, okay, so typically the parents don't find out
Hmm.
until the trafficker has leaked the
Oh gosh.
footage. So just
Yeah.
say we're talking a 14-year-old girl, he's sort of faked this relationship online,
Hmm.
the trafficker, and then said like, "Can you give me these images?" Or
Yeah.
and she complies. Sometimes it's out of fear. He
Hmm.
might promise her money once
Hmm.
she gives the images, so the naked images.
Hmm.
He will then say, "You need to pay me if you don't want me to release these,
Okay.
or unless you give me more." He'll keep asking for
Oh
more
my
and more
gosh. Of course they
images.
don't have the money to pay for that. So,
Uh-huh. And if they don't have the money, he'll ask for more and say, "If you don't give me any more images, I
hmm.
will like leak these to your school and on your
Oh my
Facebook."
gosh.
So often at that point, the
Hmm.
girl, as boys as well, we're seeing, will go to their parents and be like, this is what happened. Parents go to the police, and then they'll come to our child advocacy center where we do safe, child-friendly forensic interviewing and get that
Yeah.
record their testimony.
Wow, it's amazing. Are you guys able to catch some people before that even gets to that level? Like, is there like I'm sure there's some type of education or maybe another
Yes.
organization that does that part of it.
Yeah, at A21, we have Reach, Recover, and Restore.
Uh-huh.
So we do prevention, awareness, and education. So we've got
Yeah.
some amazing curriculum to if any parents are listening to this and
Hmm.
freaking out, if you
Yeah.
go to A21, so A21
Uh-huh.
.org, There's some great curriculum, parent guides for having these conversations with their children and teenagers about human trafficking. Because if you can teach your young person about human trafficking, then they know the indicators and the
Mm,
signs to look out for. So on in these parent guides, there's even scripts. If you're not
that's
sure, because it's a little bit awkward having these
sure.
conversations,
Can
there are
imagine.
scripts
Yeah.
that you can follow. Um, we have a K through 12 curriculum that's actually being rolled out in some states across the US. So we're bringing curriculum into schools,
Hmm.
primary and secondary schools, for teachers to actually start to educate
Oh, that's good.
children and teenagers about human trafficking. So we do this in all of our different offices. We do this awareness, education, and prevention.
Love
Because
it.
if we can prevent trafficking from happening in the first place, then
Yeah.
ultimately the aim.
Wow. My
So,
son's 7 years old. He's over at South Lake, over at Carroll, Carroll ISD. Um, I know they had like a child, they had an internet safety guy come and speak,
right.
but are you guys in those types of school, the public schools locally here, or need help with that?
Yes, we are. So I think coming into Dallas
Okay.
ISD,
Oh,
and
nice.
there are plans to roll it out
Okay.
further. I know we're
Awesome.
in Michigan,
Okay.
Florida. Yeah, it's definitely gaining traction.
Yeah, well, if a parent, what about a home, if I'm a homeschool parent and I'm wanting to kind of introduce this to my kid, what do you say to a 7-year-old? I mean, because if they're not, do you even,
Mhm.
I mean, because I don't even want my son to be even, I kind of don't even want him to be aware that this even exists, but then you want them to be prepared. So what's the balance in that?
Yeah, especially with the online safety too, because
Yes.
kids are getting so much exposure online. But that's where we do have the resources for
Hmm.
parents of kids of different ages.
Okay.
So it's all suited to like the child appropriate language for
Hmm.
each age.
Yeah.
So if parents want to go online to a21.org, there
Yeah.
is that curriculum for them to talk about that. We
I
have
love it.
online safety guides. And then we've got relationship safety guides, we've got
Mm.
employment safety guides as well.
That's so good. So
Yeah.
needed. Well, let's talk about the heartbreaks and retakes again. There's so many people that are going through divorce.
Mm,
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself when all that happened, what would you say to that Rhiannon?
I think I will comfort her, like I give myself self-compassion, provide
Hmm.
compassion to myself. I think when people are going through divorce, there's so much shame,
Yeah,
especially in the Christian world too.
right.
Um, and so there's so much shame and blame. And so
Hmm.
I would provide compassion and also let her know that it's all going to be okay, that you'll get through
Hmm.
this.
Yeah.
And so that's easy for me to see in
Oh, sure.
hindsight. But I
Yeah,
think for so many years, I just wanted to know that my life would be okay.
right. Yeah,
And I think it's a process,
yeah,
healing. And what I tell the women in my groups and my clients is, okay, there's different ways that you can go through grief, and sometimes we can just sort of push the pain down because we don't want to face it because it's
yeah.
so hard and we can just get on with life.
Hmm.
But to promote emotional wellness and healing, we actually need to face the pain. We need to allow ourselves time to grieve
Yeah. Yes.
and develop a really healthy relationship with emotions. So things like sadness is not bad, and
Yeah.
anger is not a bad emotion, neither is fear.
Yes.
It's what we do with it that
Hmm.
that matters. So
Yeah.
often if we have a spectrum of emotions, we've got happiness and joy at one end and hope, and then we've got like sadness and
Yeah.
fear down the other end. We all want to hang out at the happy end, which is
Hmm.
great. I want to hang out here too, but
Sure.
in life we will face challenges and we
Yeah.
will experience the more negative or painful emotions.
Hmm.
And unless we know how to deal with those and regulate those emotions properly, then it's going to like cause issues for us
Yes.
further down the track if we don't actually process those. So things like
Mm-hmm.
fear is
Mm-hmm.
actually like God made us to feel fear. It's
Yeah.
an alert that there's impending danger. Now, sometimes that danger, like fear, is overreacting
Mm-hmm.
and there's no real threat, it's just a perceived threat. But
Yeah.
sometimes we need to actually listen to fear. Sadness comes
Yes.
up when there's grief, anger
Mm-hmm.
comes up when there's injustice or perceived injustice.
Mm-hmm.
It's if it wasn't for like Christine and Nick Kane feeling anger at the injustice of human trafficking, A21 never would have been.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So it's um I do a lot of teaching women to develop this healthy relationship with their emotions,
Hmm.
so that they can come outside the other end of the healing journey actually
Yes.
healthy and whole. And if they're wanting to step into another relationship, they actually
Mm.
are able to sort of manage their emotions, regulate their emotions, and enter that relationship out of a place of wholeness and not
Yes.
brokenness and bitterness.
Oh, that's so good. Wow. And now when you had the luxury of being around a team of other psychologists that you could talk to, well, how much harder would it have been if you were kind of all alone?
Oh, so much harder. Yeah, I was regularly getting therapy from my psychologist friends. That
Yeah.
was incredibly helpful. They were amazing. I remember
Mm.
the day I signed my divorce papers.
Uh-huh.
No, I mean, no one prepares you for signing your divorce papers. Like, how do you
Oh,
do that? I actually went out on my lunch break with two of my colleagues,
gosh, yeah.
and I went into the courthouse, signed the papers, and then we went out for coffee, and then I went back and saw a few clients.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but just having their support was amazing.
Absolutely. I wonder, do you have stats? I'm just curious, the number of people that go through divorce that don't have somebody like you or don't even seek out somebody to talk to.
Oh, I don't have the stats, but I
I'm
should look
curious.
into that. I just think it makes such a difference to have like a coach or a therapist,
Hmm.
someone to process your thoughts and your feelings with,
Yes.
someone to ask you
Hmm.
challenging questions that maybe you don't want to look at, but maybe
Right.
you need to look at.
Right. Right.
Um, it's so powerful, someone to guide you on that healing and give you
Mhm.
strategies. It's not just about listening and going over the pain of the
Yeah.
breakup.
Yeah.
It's actually to learn strategies to rebuild your identity, because often during a breakup or divorce, there's this loss of identity, there's grief
Yes.
about a future that will
Hmm.
no longer exist. So someone to actually give you strategies to rebuild. And that's
Hmm.
why my business is called Heartbreaks and Retakes. So yes, I focus on the heartbreak. Like,
Yeah.
let's process the grief. Let's give you strategies to
Yeah.
deal with the grief in a healthy way. But let's also look at the retake. So the
Yes.
retake is the opportunity to rebuild. And it may not seem like an opportunity at a time at the
Sure.
time. I know it
Sure.
didn't for me, but I'm
Yeah.
so thankful now that I had that
Yes.
sort of second chance on
Yeah.
life, the do-over,
Hmm.
to like start life again. Now, I was in a
Hmm.
situation where I didn't have children. I know for a lot of men and women, when they've got children, they can't just pack up and move
Sure.
across the
Right.
globe.
Right. Across the world.
Yes, but there's an opportunity for other new adventures and things that they can start. And so
Yeah.
after the grieving process and the healing comes the looking forward to a future and maybe stepping out and doing
Yeah.
new things.
Yeah. Does it take, I mean, I imagine every journey is very individual. Like one person may be ready to start looking for another spouse in a year, others it might take 5 years, and some may never be ready, right?
Yeah, everyone's different. I do know that
Mhm.
research shows that men will often repartner faster than
Yes.
women.
Yeah, I can
But there
imagine
could be
that.
a few different reasons for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But I think it is so important to actually do the work of healing, to grieve and
Mhm.
heal before moving on. And I
Yeah.
don't give a timeline,
Yeah.
or because it's so different.
Mm.
But I think giving yourself space to grieve and heal and get some coaching
Mm.
or therapy is so important before entering that next relationship where you're
Yeah.
just bringing all your baggage from the previous
Yes.
relationship.
Do men take less time because we tend to like, oh, it'll be okay. Let's just move on and not really talk about our feelings and
I
probably
think
bring
that's
some baggage into the next relationship?
uh-huh. I think that's probably a big factor.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
also sort of missing the
Sure.
companionship
Sure.
of the
Yeah.
relationship too. But yeah, less emotion focused coping, more solution focused coping of just like, we'll just move on with life, uh,
Yeah.
and just get on with things. We don't need to sort of do the deep work. I think
Yeah.
women too, sometimes they may come to a point where they're like, oh, it's actually kind of nice not to have to focus on someone
Yes.
else, like to be able to focus on themselves
Mhm.
a little bit and get some space and some
So
healing
good.
can be really
Wow.
therapeutic.
Man. Okay, let's pretend you're in front, last question. You're in front of a group of women that have just gone through a tough time, a divorce or about to. What's your message to them?
My message is one of hope,
Mm.
that you will get through this. I know it's really painful right now, but through experiencing this pain, you've actually got an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
And there's this concept of post-traumatic growth that when we go through a traumatic experience, and divorce and heartbreak is traumatic, it's actually the opportunity, it presents an opportunity for growth. Like, yes, there will
Mm,
be the grief, and it's
yeah.
important to process that, but you
Mm,
can also come out of this relationship or this divorce so much stronger,
yes.
um, a better version of yourself with more of a sense of meaning and purpose for life.
Hmm.
Research actually shows that it's not just me sort of spreading toxic
Right,
positivity.
right.
There is this concept of post-traumatic growth. So that would be my message, that this is painful, but yes, you can grow from this.
Yeah.
And it may actually be something that sets you up for an amazing future.
Mm, that's so good. Well, you're proof of it. God's done it in your life.
Thanks,
So
Ryan.
I
God's
love it.
been very faithful.
He is. He's faithful. Thank you for doing this, and you're welcome back anytime you want to
Oh,
dig
thank
into
you
any of
so
this
much
stuff.
for having me.